Hey there, tonight you'll step into the marble halls of ancient Rome, where sacred flames cast dancing shadows and 6 women guard secrets darker than the underground chambers that await the condemned. You'll live the life of a Vestal Virgin from the moment they tear you from your family as a child, to the impossible burden of maintaining Rome's eternal fire, to the horrifying truth that your purity is worth more than your life, and the chilling reality that one whispered accusation could see you buried alive beneath the streets of the empire you serve. Before we continue deeper into these ancient shadows, take a quiet moment to subscribe if these forgotten stories bring you peace. And if you're still drifting with us, let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see who joins us from around the world as we wander through history's quieter moments. You'll discover why these supposedly blessed priestesses lived in constant terror, why their white robes became burial shrouds for the living, and how Rome's most sacred women became its most expendable victims. You'll witness the selection process that destroyed childhoods, the daily rituals that slowly crushed spirits, and the brutal punishments that turned temples into tombs. So let the shadows gather around you, and prepare to uncover the truth behind Rome's most honored prisoners, women who tended the sacred fire while their own lives slowly burned away in the darkness. And imagine Rome at dawn, when the morning mist still clings to the 7 hills, and the Forum Roman lies empty, except for the occasional priest hurrying toward his duties. The air smells of incense and marble dust, of burning cedar and the faint metallic tang of blood from yesterday's sacrifices. In this hushed hour before the city awakens, when senators still dream in their villas and merchants have yet to open their stalls, there is one place where women have been awake since before the stars faded. The Temple of Vesta stands at the heart of the Forum, its circular walls rising like a drum of white marble, so ancient that some say it remembers the time when Rome was nothing but mud huts beside the Tiber. Within these walls burns a flame that has never died, not through wars that toppled kingdoms, not through plagues that emptied cities, not through the rise and fall of emperors whose names once shook the world. This is the eternal fire of Rome, and for over 1,000 years it has been tended by the same kind of guardians, virgins stolen from their families as children, sworn to purity, and condemned to lives that glitter like gold but cut like broken glass. You are about to become one of them. Step closer to those marble columns, each one carved with reliefs of sacrifice and devotion. Feel the cool stone beneath your bare feet as you cross the threshold into the atrium where these women live. The Atrium Vestae, a complex of 55 rooms that will become your entire world for the next 30 years. If you survive that long, the air here is different, thicker, heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets, of whispered prayers and stifled screams. Look around you at the peaceful courtyards with their rectangular pools reflecting the morning sky, at the painted walls depicting scenes of pastoral beauty, at the comfortable chambers with their soft beds and fine furnishings. This is luxury. Yes, but luxury can be a chain as surely as iron, and comfort can become a cage when you cannot leave it. Listen carefully, and you might hear the sound that defines this place more than any other, the soft whisper of fabric against marble, as 6 women move through their morning rituals, dressed in white stola that mark them as different from every other woman in Rome. These are the Vestal Virgins, and they walk with the careful precision of people who know that a single misstep could mean death. See how they move with their eyes downcast, their faces serene masks that reveal nothing of the thoughts beneath. Watch how they never quite meet each other's gazes, how they maintain the perfect distance from one another that speaks not of sisterhood but of survival. These women have learned that in a world where your virtue is your life, trust is a luxury you cannot afford. The youngest among them might be 7 years old, still small enough that her white veil seems to swallow her entirely. The oldest could be approaching 40, her face bearing the lines of 3 decades spent walking the knife's edge between reverence and revulsion. Between them span the others, women in their teens and 20s and 30s who have learned to smile without warmth, to speak without saying anything, to live without truly being alive. Each morning they rise in the darkness to tend the sacred fire that burns in the temple's heart. Each evening they retreat to their chambers to prepare for another night of dreamless sleep. And in between, they perform the rituals that keep Rome itself alive, or so Rome tells them, so Rome demands they believe. But Rome lies. Oh, the fire is real enough. It burns with an hungry light that has consumed more than just wood and oil over the centuries. It has consumed lives, dreams, childhoods, futures. It has fed on the years stolen from girls who should have grown up to be wives and mothers, who should have known love and choice, and the simple freedom to walk beyond these marble walls whenever they pleased. Instead, they tend the flame that devours them. You see, what Rome doesn't tell its citizens, what the priests whisper only in the darkest corners of the temples, is that the Vestal Virgins are not honored servants of the goddess. They are sacrifices, living offerings placed upon an altar of male fear and divine obsession. They are prisoners whose cells are made of sacred law, rather than iron bars, whose chains are woven from ceremony and tradition rather than forged from metal. Rome needs them to be pure, because Rome needs something to blame when things go wrong, when the harvests fail, when the legions are defeated, when plagues sweep through the city. The people need an explanation that makes sense of senseless suffering. And what better explanation than the corruption of the women who guard Rome's most sacred flame? The Vestals know this. They have always known this. It is written in the careful way they hold themselves, in the measured cadence of their speech, in the way they flinch slightly when any man draws too near. They know that their white robes are not symbols of purity but targets painted upon their backs, that their sacred status makes them not safer but infinitely more vulnerable. They know that somewhere beneath the streets of Rome, in a place called the Campus Sigillaratus, the evil field, there are chambers prepared for them, small underground rooms equipped with beds and lamps and a few days' worth of food, where condemned Vestals are sealed away to die slowly in the darkness, their screams unheard by the city that once worshipped them. This is the world you are about to enter. This is the life that awaits you behind these beautiful marble walls, beneath these painted ceilings, within these comfortable chambers that will become your tomb long before you die. Welcome to the Temple of Vesta. Welcome to your new home. Welcome to your beautiful, sacred, inescapable prison. The morning you are chosen begins like any other in your father's villa on the Palatine Hill. You are 8 years old, still young enough to believe that the world is fundamentally fair, that adults protect children, that honors are truly honorable. You wake in your small chamber to the sound of birds singing in the courtyard garden, sunlight filtering through the wooden shutters and golden bars across your bed. Your mother is braiding your hair when the knock comes at the door, not the casual rap of a neighbor or the familiar call of a servant, but the formal, measured sound that speaks of official business. You hear your father's sandals slapping against the marble floors as he hurries to answer. Hear the low murmur of voices that suddenly stops, replaced by a silence so complete it seems to suck the warmth from the morning air. Then your mother's hand still in your hair, her fingers trembling slightly as she sets down the ivory comb. "Stay here," she whispers, but her voice carries a note you've never heard before, something broken and desperate that makes your stomach clench with sudden fear. But you are 8 years old and curious as a cat, so you creep to the doorway and peer around the corner into the atrium. There, framed by the painted columns and the dancing light from the impluvium, stand 3 men in white togas with purple stripes. Even at your age you recognize the marks of high office, the insignia that mean these men speak with the voice of Rome itself. The tallest among them carries a scroll sealed with wax, and when he speaks his voice echoes off the walls with the weight of divine authority. Marcus Flavius Quintus. He intones using your father's full name in the way that means terrible things are about to happen. By order of the Pontifex Maximus and the Sacred College of Priests, your daughter has been chosen for the highest honor Rome can bestow upon a patrician house. Your father sways slightly, as if the words have struck him a physical blow. Your mother appears in the doorway behind you, her face the color of ash, one hand pressed to her throat as if she cannot breathe. The captio has been performed, the priest continues, and even though you don't know this word, something about the way he says it makes your skin crawl. Your daughter will serve the goddess Vesta as one of her sacred virgins. She will tend the eternal flame that keeps Rome safe, guard the sacred mysteries that ensure our empire's continued prosperity. Her name will be remembered with honor for as long as Rome endures. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? The highest honor Rome can bestow, a sacred calling, a life of privilege and respect. Your child's mind latches onto the beautiful words sacred, honored, remembered. You imagine yourself draped in white silk, crowned with flowers, beloved by the gods themselves. But your parents know better. Your father's face crumples as if he's aged 20 years in as many seconds. He reaches out one trembling hand toward you, then lets it fall to his side, understanding that you no longer belong to him. When he asks, and his voice is barely a whisper, today comes the reply, as cold and final as a tombstone. The selection has been made. The goddess has called. She must come with us now. Your mother makes a sound like a wounded animal, quickly stifled behind her hand. You see tears streaming down her cheeks, and confusion floods through you because shouldn't she be happy? Shouldn't she be proud that her daughter has been chosen for such a magnificent honor? The priests explain it all so beautifully. You will live in the most sacred house in Rome, they say. You will be closer to the gods than any other mortal. You will have servants to attend your every need, the finest food, the most beautiful clothes. Citizens will bow when you pass. Senators will step aside to let you through. Even the emperor himself will show you reverence. They don't mention that you will never see your parents again except from a distance during public ceremonies. They don't explain that the beautiful clothes are a uniform you can never remove, that the servants are also your guards, that the reverence comes with a price that grows heavier with every passing year. They speak of the goddess Vesta as if she were a loving mother who will cherish her chosen daughters. They describe the eternal flame as a sacred trust, a holy privilege, a divine responsibility. They make it sound like tending a fire is the most important work in the world, and perhaps in Rome's twisted cosmology, it is. What they don't tell you is that this fire is hungry, that it demands more than wood and oil and careful attention, that it feeds on years and dreams and possibilities, that it consumes childhoods like kindling and burns away futures, as if they were nothing more than smoke. They speak of your 30 years of service, as if it were a brief interlude, a small sacrifice for so great an honor. 30 years, what does that mean to an 8-year-old? You can barely remember being 6. 30 years might as well be forever, and in many ways it is. The priests paint pictures of your life to come in terms so glowing they might have been dipped in gold. They speak of festivals where you will be the center of attention, of ceremonies where your presence brings the very blessing of the gods. They describe your legal privileges, how you will be able to own property, make a will, testify in court without taking an oath. For a woman in Rome, these freedoms are revolutionary, unprecedented, divine. They don't mention that these privileges come because you will no longer be considered fully human, that you will exist in a space between mortal and divine that leaves you belonging to neither world, that your legal independence springs from your complete social isolation. As they speak, you find yourself nodding along, swept up in the grandeur of their vision. You imagine yourself processing through the forum in white robes, blessed and beloved. You picture the grateful faces of Roman citizens as you perform the sacred rituals that keep their city safe. You dream of being remembered forever as one of Rome's most honored daughters. You are 8 years old, and you believe in beautiful lies. Within the hour, you will learn the weight of truth. The word captio means capture, and now you understand why. You are not invited to become a Vestal Virgin. You are not asked if you would like this honor. You are taken, seized, claimed by Rome as surely as if enemy soldiers had burst through your door and dragged you away in chains. The only difference is that your captors wear white togas instead of armor, and they speak of divine will instead of conquest. But capture it is, nonetheless. The process began months ago, though you knew nothing of it then. In the sacred colleges of Rome's priests, your name appeared on a list alongside 19 others, patrician girls between the ages of 6 and 10, daughters of families prominent enough to matter, but not powerful enough to refuse. The Pontifex Maximus himself reviewed these names, checking each against the sacred requirements. Both parents living. Essential might you cannot belong to the goddess if you still belong to the dead. Physically perfect. Absolutely crucial. No scars, no deformities, no blemishes that might offend divine eyes. Mental faculties intact. Required. The goddess demands servants who can learn her mysteries and perform her rites flawlessly. Patrician blood. Non-negotiable. Only the highest families may offer their daughters to Vesta, though this honor often feels more like punishment to those who receive it. One by one, the priests investigated your family history, your health, your character. They spoke to your servants, questioned your tutors, observed you from a distance during public festivals. You were examined like a sacrificial animal, evaluated for your fitness to serve a goddess who demands nothing less than perfection. When the final selection was made, lots were drawn from a silver urn in the presence of the full pontifical college. 20 names entered that urn, but only one emerged. Your name, spoken aloud in the hushed chambers where Rome's religious fate is decided, where the will of the gods is interpreted by mortal men who claim to speak for immortal powers. Your parents received no warning, no time to prepare or protest or even say goodbye properly. This is deliberate cruelty disguised as divine urgency. The priests know that parents given time will resist, will find excuses, will discover suddenly that their daughter has a hidden defect, or that their family line is not quite as pure as they claimed. Better to arrive at dawn with the selection already made, the divine will already declared, the choice already removed from human hands. Now, as you stand in your family's atrium watching your mother weep and your father age before your eyes, you begin to understand what honor really means in Rome. It means you have been chosen for something you cannot refuse, something that will consume your life as surely as fire consumes wood. The priest who bears the scroll, the one with the voice like cold marble, explains that you must come immediately. There can be no delay, no time for lengthy farewells or careful preparations. The goddess has called, and when Vesta calls, mortal concerns become irrelevant. Your toys will be left behind. Your childhood friends will become memories. Your parents will become strangers you glimpse occasionally during public ceremonies. But surely your father ventures, his voice cracking like a boy's. Surely we can have a few hours to prepare her, to help her understand what this means. The priest's smile is as thin as winter sunlight. The goddess requires no preparation. Your daughter will learn all she needs to know in the service of Vesta. Her old life ends today. Her new life begins immediately. Your mother steps forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. She's just a child, she whispers. She's my baby. Can't you see she's too young for this? Old enough to be chosen, comes the reply. Young enough to be pure. The goddess knows what she requires, and there it is, the beautiful lie at the heart of Rome's most sacred institution. This is not about the goddess at all. This is about control, about ensuring that the women who hold Rome's most important religious office never develop the kinds of attachments or loyalties that might interfere with their absolute obedience. You are being taken as a child because children can be molded, shaped, broken into the forms their masters require. An 8-year-old can be taught that her service to Vesta is the highest possible calling. A grown woman might ask inconvenient questions about why that service requires the complete sacrifice of her humanity. As the priests speak, you notice things your child's mind struggles to process. The way your father's hands shake as he reaches for his purse, as if he thinks he can buy his way out of this divine decree. The way your mother's maid hovers in the doorway, her face twisted with the kind of pity usually reserved for the condemned. The way the youngest priest keeps glancing toward the door, as if he expects someone to burst in and put a stop to this holy kidnapping. They give you no time to pack, no chance to gather the small treasures that make a child's life bearable. You are allowed to embrace your parents once, a brief, desperate clutching that tastes of salt tears and broken dreams, before gentle but implacable hands separate you from the only people who have ever loved you without condition. Will I see them again? You ask as you are led toward the door, your voice small and lost in the morning air. You will see all of Rome, the priest replies, which is not an answer at all. Your mother calls your name once as you cross the threshold, a sound like something dying. You turn back to look at her, memorizing her face through your own tears, not knowing it will be the last time you see her as simply your mother, rather than as a stranger in the crowd, during some distant festival. The litter waiting outside is beautiful. Carved cedar wood inlaid with ivory, cushions of the finest silk, curtains that shimmer like captured starlight. It looks like something built for a princess, and in a way that's exactly what it is. You are about to become Roman royalty of a sort, elevated above all other women, honored and revered and utterly alone. As the bearers lift your litter and begin the journey toward the forum, toward the temple that will become your entire world, you press your face to the window and watch your father's house grow smaller behind you. With every step, your old life recedes until it seems like something from a dream, beautiful and distant and forever out of reach. You don't yet understand that this is the point, that to serve the goddess properly, you must be severed completely from the human world, cut free from all earthly attachments until nothing remains but your duty to tend a fire that will slowly burn away everything you might have been. You are 8 years old, and you have just been chosen for the highest honor Rome can bestow. You are 8 years old, and your life is over. The litter carries you through Rome's streets like a jeweled box bearing precious cargo, but you feel more like a sacrificial lamb being led to slaughter. Through the silk curtains you catch glimpses of the city awakening. Merchants setting up their stalls, slaves hurrying with jugs of water balanced on their heads, citizens beginning the daily business of the empire. Normal people living normal lives, while you journey towards something that will strip away your humanity and replace it with something sacred and terrible. The Forum Roman opens before you like the mouth of some great beast, its marble columns and bronze statues gleaming in the morning sun. But your destination lies at its heart, the circular temple of Vesta, ancient beyond measure, its white walls holding secrets that predate the very stones of Rome itself. Beside it stands your new home, the Atrium Vestae, a complex of buildings that seem beautiful from the outside, but will soon reveal themselves as the most elegant prison ever constructed. As your litter is lowered before the temple steps, you see them for the first time, the 5 other Vestal Virgins who will be your sisters, your teachers, your rivals, and your judges for the next 30 years. They stand in perfect formation, arranged by age and seniority, their white robes pristine as fresh snow, their faces masks of serene composure that reveal nothing of their thoughts. The eldest, the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, steps forward to receive you. She might be 35 or 60. It's impossible to tell beneath the layers of ceremonial paint and the weight of decades spent perfecting the art of emotional invisibility. Her voice, when she speaks, carries the authority of someone who has survived longer than most, in a role where survival itself is an achievement. "Welcome, child, to the House of Vesta," she says, and her words echo off the marble with the finality of a tomb being sealed. "You have been chosen from among all the daughters of Rome to serve the eternal goddess. This is the highest honor, the greatest responsibility, the most sacred trust. You want to ask if you can go home now, if this has all been some terrible mistake, if there's a way to give this honor to someone who actually wants it." But something in her eyes, a coldness that speaks of dreams frozen to death years ago, tells you that such questions would be both futile and dangerous. The transformation begins immediately. First, they take your hair, not just a trim or a styling, but the complete severing of your childhood. The locks that your mother braided just hours ago fall to the temple floor like autumn leaves, each strand a small death, a piece of who you were before the goddess claimed you. In their place, they weave the semi-crines, 6 elaborate braids that will mark you as belonging to Vesta for as long as you draw breath. The braiding takes hours. Your scalp aches as strange hands manipulate your hair into patterns that feel foreign and heavy. They add ribbons, pins, ornaments that catch the light but feel like shackles against your skull. This is not hair anymore. It's a uniform, a symbol, a constant reminder that your very appearance now belongs to Rome. Next comes the clothing. Your simple child's tunic is stripped away, and in its place they drape the stola, the long flowing gown of a Roman matron. But you are 8 years old, and the irony cuts deep. You wear the dress of a married woman while swearing to remain forever virgin. Bear the symbols of motherhood while promising never to bear children. Carry the appearance of maturity while your childhood dies around you like scattered petals. Over the stola comes the suffibulum, a short white veil that frames your face and marks you as set apart from ordinary women. The fabric is so fine it seems woven from mist and starlight, so delicate that you're afraid to breathe too hard lest you tear it. But this fragility is deceptive. Like everything else about your new life, it appears beautiful while binding you in chains of silk and ceremony. The final touch is the infola, the sacred headband that circles your brow like a crown of ivory and gold. It's heavier than you expected, pressing down on your temples with the weight of divine expectation. You feel it there constantly, a reminder that you are no longer just a girl but a living symbol of Rome's relationship with the divine. When the dressing is complete, they lead you to a polished bronze mirror. The face that stares back is that of a stranger, pale, solemn, draped in white like a ghost already departed from the living world. You look for some trace of the child who woke in her father's house this morning. but she has vanished beneath layers of sacred costume and religious obligation. The oath comes next, spoken in the temple's inner sanctum where the eternal flame casts dancing shadows on walls carved with scenes of divine favor and mortal submission. The words are ancient, in Latin so archaic that you understand only fragments, but their meaning penetrates your soul like cold iron. You swear to guard the sacred fire for 30 years. You swear to preserve your virginity as perfectly as you preserve the flame. You swear to obey the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priestess, and the sacred laws that govern every moment of your existence. You swear to place Rome's spiritual welfare above your own happiness, your own desires, your own life. With each word you feel something breaking inside you. Not dramatically, not with pain, but with the quiet snap of a bird's wing folding for the last time. You are 8 years old, and you are promising away your entire future to gods who may or may not exist, for a city that sees you as valuable only so long as you remain untouched and untouchable. The ceremony concludes with the presentation of the sacred implements, the bronze ladle for tending the fire, the ceremonial knife for preparing sacrificial cakes, the key to the temple's inner mysteries. Each object is placed in your small hands with words about honor and privilege and divine favor, but they feel like instruments of torture disguised as tools of worship. As the sun sets on your first day as a Vestal Virgin, you are led to your cell in the Atrium Vestae. It's beautiful, painted walls depicting pastoral scenes, a comfortable bed with silk coverlets, a window that looks out on peaceful gardens. It should feel like luxury, but it feels like a tomb decorated to fool the corpse into thinking it's still alive. You lie awake that first night listening to the sounds of the city beyond your walls, laughter from taverns, music from festivals, the ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Lives you will never know, experiences you will never have, choices you will never make. At some point, you begin to cry. Not the dramatic sobs of a child's tantrum, but the quiet, hopeless tears of someone who has finally begun to understand the true weight of their beautiful, terrible fate. Tomorrow, your real education will begin. Tonight, you mourn the death of everything you might have been. Your education in the realities of Vestal life begins not with ceremonies or sacred texts, but with stories whispered in the darkness between sleeping and waking. The other Vestals don't speak of these things during daylight hours. Such conversations are dangerous, potentially treasonous, but in the deep hours of night, when only the eternal flame bears witness, fragments of truth slip through the cracks of official silence. The first name you learn is Claudia Quinta, spoken in hushed tones by Flavia, one of the middle-rank Vestals who has served for 15 years. Claudia was beautiful, they say, with eyes like dark honey and a voice that could make senators weep during the sacred chants. She served faithfully for 22 years, longer than you have been alive, tending the flame with perfect devotion and performing every ritual with flawless precision. But perfection, you learn, is not always protection. A grain merchant claimed he saw her speaking too intimately with a young augur near the temple steps. A senator's wife swore she noticed lingering glances between Claudia and a priest during the Vestalia festival. A slave reported finding a note tucked beneath the sacred utensil's love poetry, though he conveniently couldn't read the words himself. Evidence built like storm clouds, dark and threatening, until the Pontifex Maximus had no choice but to order an investigation. Claudia protested her innocence. She performed the ancient ritual of carrying water in a sieve from the Tiber to the temple, a test that would prove her purity through divine intervention. But the bottom of her sieve had been secretly perforated the night before by enemies who whispered that Rome needed a scapegoat for its recent military defeats. The water poured through like tears, and Claudia's fate was sealed. They buried her alive in the Campus Celeratus while half of Rome watched in solemn silence. The other half celebrated, convinced that removing the corruption from their most sacred order would restore divine favor to the empire. What was her crime? You ask Flavia in the darkness of your shared vigil, your child's voice barely a whisper above the crackling of the eternal flame. Her crime, Flavia replies, her own voice hollow as an empty tomb, was believing that 22 years of perfect service would protect her from the paranoia of frightened men. Then there's Licinia, whose story becomes a cautionary tale about the dangerous intersection of faith and politics. She owned property, one of the few legal rights granted to Vestal Virgins, including a beautiful villa outside the city walls. Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most powerful citizens, coveted that villa for its strategic location and reasonable price. He began visiting Licinia regularly, ostensibly to discuss religious matters but actually to pressure her into selling. His frequent visits sparked rumors. Citizens began to whisper about the wealthy man who spent so much time with the young Vestal. Jealous rivals within the priesthood saw an opportunity to remove a competitor. Before long, Licinia found herself accused of breaking her vow of chastity with one of Rome's most prominent men. The trial revealed Crassus's true motives, pure greed rather than lustful corruption, and both were acquitted, but the damage was done. Licinia's reputation never fully recovered, and she spent the remaining years of her service walking on eggshells, knowing that she had come within a heartbeat of being buried alive for the crime of owning property that someone else wanted. The lesson, whispers Domitia, the youngest of the senior Vestals, is that our privileges are also our vulnerabilities. Every right we gain gives our enemies another weapon to use against us. But perhaps the most chilling story is that of the three sisters Aemilia, Marcia, and Licinia, a different one, who fell victim to the paranoia that swept Rome in 114 BCE. A young equestrian's daughter was struck by lightning while riding, found dead with her dress torn and her body exposed. The augurs declared this a sign of sexual corruption among the Vestal Virgins, and 3 names were drawn as suspects. Aemilia was accused of being the ringleader, of corrupting her younger sisters in sacred service. The evidence was gossip and superstition, omens and accusations from slaves tortured until they said what their interrogators wanted to hear. She was convicted by the Pontifical College and executed, but this wasn't enough to satisfy Rome's hunger for purification. The people demanded the deaths of all 3, convinced that a conspiracy of corrupt priestesses was bringing divine wrath upon the empire. A special tribunal was convened, moving the trial from religious to civil courts, ensuring that the remaining 2 would also be condemned. Marcia and Licinia followed their sister to the underground chambers, sacrificed to appease a paranoid city's need for scapegoats. 3 women died. Fabia, the eldest after the chief priestess, tells you during one of your first lessons in maintaining the sacred fire, not because they were guilty of anything, but because Rome needed someone to blame for its troubles. Remember this when you tend the flame, child. We keep this fire burning, not just to honor Vesta, but to satisfy Rome's need to believe that its fate rests in the hands of women pure enough to deserve divine protection. The stories accumulate like sediment in your young mind, each one adding another layer of understanding about your true position in Roman society. You are not honored servants of the goddess. You are hostages to Rome's superstitions, living insurance policies against divine disfavor, scapegoats prepared for sacrifice whenever the empire needs someone to blame for its failures. Sometimes, late at night when the weight of these revelations presses down on you like grave soil, You think about Tuccia, the one Vestal Virgin whose story offers a glimmer of hope. Falsely accused of unchastity, she proved her innocence by carrying water in a sieve across the entire city, the goddess miraculously preventing even a single drop from spilling. Her vindication was complete, her accusers shamed, her reputation restored. But even this story carries its own dark lesson. Tuccia's miracle saved her, yes, but it also established the terrible precedent that divine intervention was the only acceptable proof of innocence. Every Vestal who followed would be measured against this impossible standard, expected to work miracles to prove what should have been presumed, that they were innocent until proven guilty. You are 9 years old now, and already you understand that in the world of the Vestal Virgins, innocence is not protection, it is merely the absence of evidence. Evidence that determined enemies can always manufacture when the need arises. Your days begin in darkness, hours before Rome stirs to life, when the only sounds are the whisper of sandals on marble, and the eternal crackling of Vesta's flame. There is no gentle awakening, no moment of drowsy transition from sleep to consciousness. The bronze bell that summons you rings sharp and urgent, a daily reminder that your life no longer belongs to the natural rhythms of rest and waking, but to the demands of divine service. You rise and immediately begin the transformation that will consume the first 2 hours of every morning for the next 30 years. This is not simply getting dressed, it is the careful construction of a living symbol, the meticulous assembly of a human representation of divine purity that must be flawless in every detail. First comes the ritual bathing in water drawn fresh from a sacred spring, carried to the temple in bronze vessels that have never touched profane lips. The water is cold, always cold, regardless of season, and you learn to suppress the gasp that wants to escape as it cascades over your child's body. Comfort is weakness, and weakness is corruption, and corruption is death. Your hair alone requires an hour's work. The senicrines, those 6 elaborate braids that mark your sacred status, must be woven exactly the same way every morning, each strand positioned with mathematical precision. Your personal ornatrix, a slave girl only slightly older than yourself, has been trained in this single skill for months before your arrival. Her hands move through your hair like a weaver at her loom, creating patterns that speak of ancient traditions and unbreakable bonds. The braids are wound with ribbons of pure white wool, each ribbon blessed by the Pontifex Maximus himself and replaced weekly whether they need it or not. Sacred pins of ivory and silver secure the elaborate construction, their placement dictated by rituals so old that their original meaning has been lost to time. When it's finished, your head feels heavy as a marble statue, crowned with the weight of divine expectation. The stola comes next, that long gown of finest linen that marks you as separate from all other women in Rome. But this is not simply clothing. It is armor made of fabric, protection that works only so long as it remains spotless, unblemished, perfect. Every fold must fall exactly right. Every drape must suggest the proper combination of dignity and humility. Every movement must be calculated to maintain the illusion of effortless grace. Over this goes the suffibulum, your sacred veil, so delicate that you fear it might dissolve in morning mist. It must frame your face just so not too concealing, lest you seem ashamed, not too revealing, lest you appear immodest. The balance is critical, and you spend long minutes adjusting it while your ornatrix holds a polished bronze mirror and whispers suggestions about tiny corrections that mean the difference between appropriate and scandalous. The final element is cosmetics paint for your face that transforms you from a human child into a divine apparition. White lead mixed with chalk for your skin, creating the marble pallor that speaks of purity and otherworldliness. Kohl around your eyes, applied with brushes made from the finest sable, drawing lines that make your gaze seem both distant and penetrating. Rouge for your lips in the precise shade of rose petals, neither too pale nor too vivid, calibrated to suggest life without passion. When the transformation is complete, you barely recognize yourself in the mirror. The child who was stolen from her family has vanished, replaced by this beautiful, terrifying stranger who moves like a goddess and breathes like a statue brought temporarily to life. You understand now why citizens bow when you pass, not out of respect for you, but out of awe for what you have been made to represent. But this is only the beginning of your daily performance. Every step you take outside your chambers is choreographed, every gesture rehearsed, every expression carefully modulated to project the proper combination of serenity and authority. You cannot stumble. That would suggest divine disfavor. You cannot smile too warmly. That would imply unseemly emotions. You cannot frown. That would indicate discontent with your sacred calling. Your voice, when you speak at all, must be pitched at exactly the right level, low enough to suggest wisdom, high enough to remind listeners of your virgin status, clear enough to carry divine authority. Every word is weighed before it leaves your lips, examined for hidden meanings that enemies might twist into evidence of corruption. During public ceremonies, the pressure becomes almost unbearable. Thousands of eyes watch your every movement, searching for signs of favor or disfavor from the goddess you serve. A slight tremor in your hands while lighting the sacred fire could be interpreted as divine withdrawal. A momentary hesitation in your step could suggest guilt weighing on your conscience. A bead of perspiration despite the morning chill could indicate the fever of unholy passion. You learn to breathe in measured intervals, to blink at calculated moments, to hold your spine so straight it aches for hours afterward. You discover muscles you never knew existed, as you train your body to move with the fluid grace expected of Vesta's chosen servants. Your feet develop calluses from walking always on marble. Your neck grows stiff from holding your elaborate headdress perfectly level. Your jaw becomes sore from maintaining the slight, serene smile that must never waver in public. The cruelest aspect of this daily transformation is how completely it erases any trace of the person you might have been. The child who loved to run through gardens, who laughed too loudly at her tutor's jokes, who sometimes forgot to wash behind her ears. That girl might as well have never existed. In her place stands this perfect, untouchable figure, who belongs not to herself but to Rome's vision of divine femininity. By evening, when you finally return to your chamber and allow your ornatrix to begin the long process of dismantling your sacred appearance, your face aches from the weight of cosmetics and the strain of constant control. Your scalp throbs from the elaborate braids. Your shoulders burn from holding perfect posture. Your soul feels hollow as an empty amphora. But tomorrow will bring the same ritual, the same transformation, the same exhausting performance of perfection. And the day after that, and the day after that, for 30 years, if you survive that long, within the marble walls of the Atrium Vesti, you quickly learn that hierarchy is everything, and understanding your place in that hierarchy means the difference between survival and destruction. This is not simply a matter of age or seniority. It is a complex web of power, influence and deadly competition, where one wrong step can transform a sister into an executioner. At the apex stands the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, Claudia Severa, a woman who has served for 28 years, and whose very presence seems to leach warmth from the air around her. She speaks in measured phrases that carry the weight of divine authority, her words chosen with the precision of a general deploying troops on a battlefield. Her face has been trained into perfect serenity for so long that you wonder if she still remembers how to express genuine emotion, or if that capacity died somewhere in the buried decades of her service. Claudia Severa commands absolute obedience not through cruelty, but through the far more terrifying weapon of complete indifference to human suffering. She has seen too many young Vestals arrive bright-eyed and hopeful, watched too many of them break or disappear or transform into hollow echoes of their former selves. You are, to her, merely the latest in an endless procession of sacrificial offerings, notable only for how long you might last before Rome's machinery of destruction claims you. The goddess requires perfection, she tells you during your first private audience, her voice carrying no more warmth than winter marble. Rome demands it. I will ensure you provide it, or you will be replaced by someone who can. Below her, the 5 remaining Vestals arrange themselves in careful order of precedence, each acutely aware of her position and desperate to maintain or improve it. Antonia Cecilia, 26 years of service, moves through the complex like a shadow, speaking only when spoken to and watching everything with eyes that have learned to see threats in the smallest gestures. She has survived this long by becoming invisible, by never drawing attention that might invite scrutiny. Then comes Junior Tertia, 21 years served, whose beauty once made senators compose poetry, and whose current gaunt appearance speaks to the slow poison of perpetual fear. Rumors follow her like hungry dogs, whispers about letters intercepted, glances noticed, conversations that lasted a heartbeat too long. She exists in a state of constant terror, knowing that her past indiscretions, real or imagined, make her vulnerable to accusations whenever Rome needs a scapegoat. Flavia Domitilla, 16 years of service, has survived by cultivating a reputation for absolute rigidity in matters of religious observance. She follows every ritual to the letter, quotes sacred law at the slightest provocation, and reports the smallest infractions of her sisters with the enthusiasm of a hunting hound. Her zealotry provides protection, but it also makes her dangerous. She would sacrifice any of you without hesitation if it might preserve her own standing. Valeria Messalina, 11 years served, represents perhaps the greatest threat of all. Still young enough to remember what freedom felt like, still beautiful enough to attract dangerous attention, still proud enough to resent her captivity. She burns with a barely contained fury that makes everyone around her nervous. Her hatred for the system that destroyed her life occasionally flickers across her carefully controlled features, and you sense that she would gladly watch the entire temple burn if she could escape in the chaos. Finally, there is Aelia Prima, newest before your arrival, now in her 7th year of service. She has learned the most important lesson of Vestal survival. Trust no one, reveal nothing, and assume that every conversation is being reported to someone who might use it against you. She moves through her duties with mechanical precision, her face a mask that reveals nothing of her thoughts or feelings. Between these women flows an undercurrent of tension, so thick you can taste it in the air. Alliances form and dissolve based on necessity rather than affection. Information becomes currency, traded carefully and never freely given. Every gesture is analyzed for hidden meaning, every word weighed for potential danger. The servants who attend you are no less dangerous than the Vestals themselves. Your ornatrix Lydia has served in the atrium for 12 years and has seen 4 different Vestals occupy your position. She knows which of them died naturally and which were buried alive, and this knowledge makes her both valuable and terrifying. She braids your hair each morning with hands that might have prepared the last toilette of condemned women, and her whispered gossip about the other Vestals feels like poison dripped directly into your ears. The guards who protect the complex are another source of constant anxiety. They are forbidden to touch you, forbidden to speak to you directly, forbidden even to look at you too long. but their very presence reminds you that you are simultaneously the most protected and most vulnerable woman in Rome. They know secrets about which Vestals receive visitors, which ones weep in their chambers at night, which ones have broken under the pressure of their impossible lives. Even the cooks and cleaners represent potential threats. Every servant is a potential spy, every conversation a possible trap. The slave who brings your morning bread might be reporting the expression on your face to enemies who would pay well for evidence of your discontent. The woman who tends the gardens could be watching for signs of forbidden meetings or improper behavior. You learn to navigate this labyrinth of suspicion with the careful steps of someone walking through a field of buried daggers. Every relationship must be calculated for its risks and benefits. Every confidence must be weighed against the possibility of betrayal. Every moment of genuine human connection must be measured against the danger it might bring. The most chilling realization is that the women who should be your sisters, your companions in this shared ordeal, are often your greatest threats. They have been shaped by the same system that is now molding you, twisted by decades of fear and isolation into creatures who would sacrifice anyone to preserve themselves. In this world, paranoia is not madness but wisdom, suspicion not cruelty but survival, and loneliness not tragic but necessary. You are 10 years old, and you are learning to live among enemies who wear the faces of friends. Of all the burdens you carry as a Vestal Virgin, none weighs heavier than the eternal flame itself. This fire, burning in the circular heart of Vesta's temple, represents more than divine favor. It is Rome's life force made manifest, the physical embodiment of the empire's relationship with the gods, and the measure by which your worth as a human being will be judged for the next 30 years. The flame burns on a bronze altar in the temple's innermost sanctuary, a chamber so sacred that only Vestal Virgins may enter. The fire itself seems alive, dancing with an otherworldly light that casts shifting shadows on walls carved with scenes of divine protection and mortal submission. It feeds on olive oil and sacred woods, cedar from Lebanon, oak from the 7 hills, pine from groves, blessed by priests who themselves have never seen the flame they serve. You learn its moods like a mother learns her child's cries. When it burns bright and steady, Rome prospers and you sleep peacefully. When it flickers or dims, your heart races with terror that mirrors the fear rippling through the city beyond the temple walls. When storms threaten or earthquakes shake the ground, you watch the flame with the desperate intensity of someone whose life hangs in the balance of each dancing tongue of fire. Because if the flame dies while you are on watch, you die with it. This is not hyperbole or religious metaphor. This is Roman law, carved in stone and enforced with pitiless efficiency. The eternal flame represents Rome's covenant with Vesta, and its extinction would signal the goddess's withdrawal of protection from the empire. Such a catastrophe demands immediate expiation, and that expiation requires the blood or, in your case, the slow suffocation of the Vestal responsible for the failure. The weight of this responsibility crushes some novices completely. You have watched girls break under the pressure, their minds snapping like overstressed bronze as they stare hour after hour at the flame, terrified that the slightest lapse in attention might doom them to burial alive. Some develop tremors that make it impossible to perform their duties safely. Others begin hallucinating threats to the fire that exist only in their terror-addled minds. Marcella, who served 2 years before your arrival, spent her final weeks as a Vestal kneeling before the altar, whimpering prayers to Vesta and jumping at every shadow. She was convinced that the flame was plotting against her, that it would wait until her vigilance faltered and then extinguish itself out of malice. When they finally found her dead in her cell poison, though no one spoke the word aloud, the other Vestals whispered that she was fortunate to escape before her madness led to something worse. The rituals surrounding the flame's care are elaborate beyond reason, designed by centuries of paranoid priests who understood that complexity creates more opportunities for failure, and failure creates more opportunities for blame. You must approach the altar from the east, never the west, lest you bring darkness instead of light. You must wear specific vestments that have been blessed on specific days by specific priests using oil from specific groves harvested during specific phases of the moon. The wood must be arranged in patterns that mirror celestial configurations, each piece placed with mathematical precision. The oil must be poured in quantities measured not by volume but by sacred numbers. 7 drops for the 7 hills, 12 for the months, 30 for the years of your service. The slightest deviation from these requirements could anger the goddess and cause the flame to die, taking your life with it. But the most terrifying aspect of tending the fire is not the complexity of the rituals, it is the understanding that the flame's fate is often beyond your control. Earthquakes can shake oil vessels and extinguish fires, floods can seep into even the most sacred chambers. Strong winds can blow through cracks in ancient walls and snuff out flames that have burned for centuries. When such natural disasters occur, logic should absolve you of blame. But Rome does not operate on logic. It operates on fear, superstition, and the desperate need to believe that human action can control divine favor. If the flame dies during your watch, regardless of cause, you become the sacrifice needed to restore cosmic order. You learn the stories of Vestals who died for the crimes of weather and geology. Quinta Opimia, buried alive when an earthquake cracked the temple wall and wind extinguished the flame during her vigil. Licinia Crusser, condemned when floods from the Tiber seeped into the sanctuary and quenched the sacred fire despite her desperate efforts to protect it. The gods, it seems, are less forgiving of natural disasters than mortal courts, and the goddess Vesta apparently values human sacrifice more than divine consistency. The psychological torture of this responsibility cannot be overstated. You live in constant awareness that forces beyond your control could end your life at any moment. Every rumble of thunder makes your heart race with fear that lightning might disturb the flame. Every tremor in the earth sends you running to check the altar. Every gust of wind through the temple complex becomes a potential executioner. Sleep becomes elusive when you know that the flame burns unattended for hours each night, vulnerable to countless threats you cannot predict or prevent. You lie awake listening for sounds from the temple, imagining disasters that might be unfolding while you rest. Some Vestals develop the habit of rising multiple times each night to check the flame, their rest fractured by anxiety until exhaustion becomes their constant companion. The flame also becomes a weapon that your enemies can use against you. A small hole drilled in the oil reservoir, undetectable until the vessel empties at a crucial moment. A hairline crack introduced into the altar stone, allowing wind to reach the fire through previously impossible channels. Sacred wood treated with substances that cause it to burn too quickly or too slowly, disrupting the careful timing of your rituals. You learn to inspect everything with the paranoid thoroughness of someone whose life depends on detecting sabotage. Every vessel, every piece of wood, every drop of oil becomes a potential instrument of your destruction. You begin to understand why the senior Vestals seem so hollow-eyed and nervous. They have spent decades knowing that their continued existence depends on the consistent behavior of an element as unpredictable as human nature itself. The eternal flame burns on, indifferent to your fear, hungry for the devotion that slowly consumes your sanity along with the sacred offerings. It demands everything and offers nothing in return except the temporary reprieve of another day survived. You are 11 years old and you have learned that your life depends on keeping a fire burning that the entire world seems determined to extinguish. The accusation comes on a morning that begins like any other, with the familiar routine of transformation and ritual that has governed your life for the past 3 years. But as you kneel before the eternal flame, performing the dawn prayers that have become as automatic as breathing, you notice something different in the quality of silence that surrounds you. It feels heavier, more pregnant with meaning, like the stillness that precedes a thunderstorm. The first sign of trouble is the absence of Valeria Messalina from the morning rituals. Her place in the ceremonial formation stands empty, creating a gap that draws every eye and sets every tongue whispering. Vestals do not simply miss sacred duties. To do so suggests either illness so severe it prevents movement, or something far worse. Claudia Severa, the chief priestess, addresses the gap with the barest acknowledgement, her voice betraying nothing of whatever knowledge lies behind her marble composure. Valeria has been called to answer questions before the Pontifex Maximus, she announces, as if this were a routine administrative matter rather than the beginning of what every Vestal fears most. But you have learned to read the signs that others miss. The way Antonia Cassilia's hands tremble slightly as she lights the sacred lamps, the manner in which Junia Turcia avoids meeting anyone's eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor as if she fears what her face might reveal. The nervous energy radiating from Flavia Domitilla, whose usual rigid composure cracks just enough to show the terror beneath. By midday, the whispers have begun to circulate through the atrium vestae like poison seeping through marble veins. A slave claims to have seen Valeria speaking too intimately with a young senator during the Vestalia festival. A citizen reports observing suspicious behavior near the temple after dark. Most damning of all, a letter has been discovered, or so the rumors say, bearing words that no Vestal should ever write or receive. The evidence builds with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche, each new accusation adding weight to the growing certainty of Valeria's guilt. It doesn't matter that the witnesses are slaves who could be tortured into saying anything their interrogators desire to hear. It doesn't matter that the letter, if it exists, could have been forged by any scribe in Rome. It doesn't matter that Valeria has served faithfully for 11 years without the slightest blemish on her record. What matters is that Rome needs a sacrifice, and Valeria has been chosen to provide it. The investigation that follows is a masterpiece of predetermined conclusion disguised as careful inquiry. The Pontifex Maximus, Marcus Aurelius Scaurus, presides over proceedings that have all the trappings of justice but none of its substance. Witnesses are called who speak with the certainty of people who know exactly what they are expected to say. Evidence is presented that seems overwhelming in its scope and damning in its implications. Valeria herself is not permitted to speak in her own defense. A voice is too sacred to be raised in such sordid proceedings, the priests explain. Instead, she stands in perfect silence while her life is dissected by men who have already decided her fate. Her face remains composed in the serene mask all Vestals learn to wear, but you see the desperation in her eyes, the growing understanding that no amount of innocence can save her from Rome's hunger for purification. The trial, if it can be called that, lasts 3 days. 3 days during which the other Vestals maintain their routines with mechanical precision, performing rituals and tending the flame while their sister's life hangs in the balance. You learn that one of the cruelest aspects of this system is how it forces you to continue your sacred duties even as it destroys those around you. The eternal flame does not pause for human tragedy, and neither can its servants. On the third evening, as shadows lengthen across the forum and the first stars appear in the darkening sky, the verdict is announced. Guilty of incestum fors, the violation of her sacred vow of chastity. The sentence follows with the inevitability of dawn, death by immurement, to be carried out immediately. The speed of execution is deliberate, designed to prevent any possibility of appeal or intervention. Within hours of the verdict, Valeria is prepared for her final journey. Her hair is unbraided for the last time, the elaborate senecrines that marked her as sacred falling in dark waves around her shoulders. Her white robes are replaced with a simple tunic, as if she has already been stripped of her divine status along with her life. The procession to the Campus Celebratus moves through Rome's streets like a funeral cortege, but slower, more deliberate, calculated to extract maximum meaning from every step. Valeria rides in a covered litter, bound and gagged, so that her voice cannot contaminate the sacred proceedings with protests of innocence or pleas for mercy. The citizens who line the route watch in fascination and horror, witnessing the ultimate consequence of corruption in Rome's most sacred order. At the burial ground, a small chamber has been prepared beneath the earth, barely large enough for a person to lie down, equipped with a bed, a lamp with enough oil for a few hours, and provisions that mock survival: bread that will last 3 days, water that will be gone in 2, milk that will sour before it can sustain life. The Pontifex Maximus speaks the ritual words that transform murder into sacrifice, that reframe execution as divine judgment. Then Valeria descends the narrow steps into her tomb, her movements dignified even in the face of unthinkable death. The entrance is sealed with stone and earth, leaving no marker to commemorate her existence or acknowledge her suffering. Her lover, if he ever existed, has vanished into the anonymity of exile, his punishment a loss of status rather than loss of life. This disparity the man escapes while the woman dies is not an accident, but a feature of the system, designed to ensure that the burden of divine purity falls entirely on those least able to protect themselves. Above ground, Rome breathes a collective sigh of relief. The corruption has been purged, the gods appeased, the cosmic order restored. Valeria's death becomes a cautionary tale told to frighten future generations of Vestals into perfect obedience. But in the Atrium Vestae, her empty chamber serves as a different kind of lesson. It reminds you that innocence is no protection, that perfect service guarantees nothing, and that any of you could be next. You are 14 years old and you have watched your sister die for the crime of being human in a world that demands divinity. In the wake of Valeria's death, the atmosphere in the Atrium Vestae changes like air before a storm. The remaining Vestals move with even greater caution, their already careful interactions becoming exercises in calculated survival. You watch and learn as women who have lived this nightmare for decades deploy strategies honed by years of navigating mortal danger disguised as divine service. Claudia Severa, the chief priestess, demonstrates the first and most crucial survival technique: strategic invisibility. She has perfected the art of being present without being memorable, of fulfilling every duty flawlessly while never drawing attention to herself. During public ceremonies, she performs her role with mechanical precision, her face a serene mask that reveals nothing of her thoughts or personality. Citizens see what they expect to see: a holy woman devoted to her goddess, rather than a human being with desires, fears, or opinions that might be twisted into evidence of corruption. Become a reflection of what they need you to be, she tells you during one of your private instruction sessions, her voice carrying the weight of 28 years spent perfecting this dangerous art. Never let them see the woman beneath the priestess. That woman is vulnerable. That woman can be accused, tried, condemned. The priestess is untouchable, but only so long as she never fully becomes human. Antonia Cecilia employs a different strategy: the cultivation of powerful allies outside the temple walls. Over her 26 years of service, she has carefully built relationships with influential senators' wives, patrician mothers who see her as a symbol of their own family's piety. These women attend her public ceremonies faithfully, make generous offerings to the temple, and speak of her holiness in the social circles that shape public opinion. When whispers begin to circulate, and they always do, eventually these allies provide a defensive network of voices speaking on her behalf. Antonia Cecilia, corrupt, impossible. I've known her family for generations. Her dedication to the goddess is beyond question. Such testimonials from respected matrons carry more weight than any formal defense, creating a social barrier that accusers must breach before they can reach their target. But these alliances come with their own dangers. Antonia must remember the names of children she's never met, express interest in family dramas that bore her to tears, and maintain the fiction of caring deeply about women whose company she tolerates only as insurance against destruction. The emotional labor is exhausting, but the alternative is the underground chamber that claimed Valeria. Junior Tertia has chosen perhaps the most psychologically damaging strategy: preemptive confession. Having survived one near accusation early in her service, she has made herself indispensable to the chief priestess by reporting every suspicious behavior she observes among her sisters. No conversation is too private, no gesture too innocent, no expression too fleeting to escape her attention and subsequent analysis. She justifies this betrayal as religious duty, convincing herself that protecting the order's purity requires constant vigilance against human weakness. But you see the cost in her hollow eyes, in the way she flinches when other Vestals approach her, in the tremor in her hands that grows worse each year. She has purchased survival at the price of her soul, and the debt compounds daily. Flavia Domitilla takes a different approach: religious extremism as armor. She has made herself so identified with rigid adherence to sacred law that any accusation against her would seem to attack the goddess herself. She quotes ancient texts in casual conversation, performs optional rituals with elaborate devotion, and speaks of her calling with such fervent conviction that even cynical priests find themselves believing in her absolute purity. This strategy requires constant performance, an exhausting display of devotion that leaves no room for doubt or humanity. Flavia cannot express frustration with her duties, cannot show affection for anything beyond her service to Vesta, cannot even allow herself the luxury of honest emotion. She has become a living embodiment of religious ideals, as rigid and lifeless as the marble statues that decorate the temple. You at 14 begin developing your own survival mechanisms, strategic youth. You cultivate an appearance of innocence so profound that accusations against you would seem absurd. You ask naive questions about topics you understand perfectly, express wonder at ceremonies you've witnessed hundreds of times, and maintain the wide-eyed enthusiasm of a novice despite years of experience. This performance requires careful calibration. Too much innocence and you appear simple-minded, potentially unreliable in your sacred duties. Too little and you lose the protection that genuine childhood naivety provides. You must seem mature enough to be trusted with cosmic responsibilities while remaining young enough to be incapable of sophisticated corruption. The newest arrival, Pomponia Rufana, only 10 years old and still weeping for her lost family, presents a different kind of threat and opportunity. Her genuine grief and obvious terror make accusations against her temporarily impossible. Not even Rome's most paranoid citizens would believe a child so obviously traumatized capable of elaborate deception. But her emotional instability also makes her dangerous, a potential source of unpredictable behavior that could draw unwanted attention to the entire order. The other Vestals handle Pomponia with the delicate care of bomb disposal experts, offering just enough comfort to prevent complete breakdown while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid guilt by association. You watch Claudia Severa calculate exactly how much kindness to show enough to keep the child functional, not enough to suggest dangerous emotional attachment. All of these strategies share common elements: emotional detachment, careful observation, and the constant awareness that survival requires the suppression of natural human instincts. Trust becomes impossible when anyone might be a threat or a witness. Friendship transforms into calculated alliance. Even kindness must be weighed against its potential risks. The most successful Vestals learn to live as if they were already dead, viewing their bodies as temporary vessels for divine service rather than homes for human souls. They master the art of existing without truly living, of breathing without feeling, of continuing day after day in a state of suspended animation that protects them from both hope and despair. You are 14 years old, and you are learning that survival in this sacred prison requires the gradual murder of everything that makes you human. The only question is whether anything recognizable will remain when your 30 years are finally over. The Vestalia arrives each June like a fever dream of devotion, transforming you from a carefully guarded prisoner into the living center of Rome's spiritual universe. For 8 days you become more than human and levitate a goddess status in the eyes of citizens who see in your white robes and serene countenance the very embodiment of divine protection. But with this elevation comes a terror so profound it makes your daily anxieties seem like gentle worries. The festival begins at dawn on the 9th day before the Ides of Junius, when the sacred storehouse of Vesta's temple is opened for the only time all year. Citizens flood the forum in numbers that strain the very stones beneath their feet, pushing forward with desperate hunger to glimpse the mysteries normally hidden from mortal eyes. They bring offerings: bread baked from their finest flour, milk from their most prized goats, honey so pure it seems to capture sunlight itself. You stand at the temple's threshold wearing robes so white they hurt to look at, your face painted with cosmetics that transform your features into something ethereal and untouchable. The Sini crines adorning your head have been woven with threads of real gold, creating a crown that catches the morning light and throws it back in patterns that seem to move with divine fire. Every gesture has been rehearsed until it flows like water, every expression calculated to inspire awe rather than recognition of your humanity. The crowd's reaction is visceral, immediate, overwhelming. Grown men fall to their knees at the sight of you, tears streaming down weathered faces as they behold what they believe to be a living goddess. Women reach out desperately, hoping that touching even the hem of your robe might bring fertility to their barren wombs or protection to their endangered children. The press of bodies becomes so intense that your lictors Naled, the guards assigned to protect your sacred person, must form a human barrier to prevent the crowd from crushing you in their fervor to get closer to divinity. Blessed Vesta, they cry, protect our homes, guard our children, keep our fires burning. Their voices blend into a roar that reverberates off the marble columns and bronze statues, creating an echo that seems to come from the gods themselves. In this moment you understand with crystal clarity why Rome cannot afford to let you be human. These people need you to be divine more than they need to breathe, and their desperation makes them dangerous in ways that political enemies could never match. The ritual of distributing blessed bread becomes an exercise in controlled chaos. Each loaf you touch is believed to carry protective power that can last an entire year. Mothers fight to get their children close enough to receive your blessing, their maternal instincts overriding social propriety as they struggle against the crowd. You move through this sea of reaching hands and pleading faces like a sleepwalker, your trained smile never wavering even as your heart pounds with the terror of someone drowning in human need. But it is during the evening ceremonies that the true weight of divine performance becomes unbearable. As darkness falls and torches transform the forum into a landscape of dancing shadows, you must kindle the sacred fire anew. Not the eternal flame that burns continuously in the temple's heart, but a ceremonial fire that represents Rome's renewal for another year. The entire city watches as you approach the altar, their collective breath held in anticipation. The friction method required by ancient law makes this moment a test of endurance as much as faith. You must create fire using only wooden sticks and tinder, your hands working the implements while thousands of eyes search for any sign of divine disfavor. If the wood fails to catch, if your technique falters, if the gods seem reluctant to grant their blessing, the crowd's adoration can transform into something much more dangerous. You remember the stories of Vestals who failed this test. Claudia Maxima, whose fire would not light during the year plague swept through Rome. She was accused of impurity and condemned before the festival ended. Cornelia Prima, whose flame sputtered and died during a thunderstorm, interpreted as a sign that Jupiter himself rejected her service. The underground chamber claimed her within days. Your hands shake as you work the fire sticks, the friction gradually heating the tinder while your mind races through every possible disaster. The crowd's silence becomes deafening, pregnant with the kind of attention that can either elevate you to the heavens or drag you down to the campus celeratus. When the first wisp of smoke appears, a collective sigh ripples through the gathering. When flames finally burst to life, the roar of approval is so loud it seems to shake the very foundations of the temple. But even success brings its own dangers. The crowd's ecstasy becomes a living thing, pressing against you with an intensity that borders on violence. They want to touch you, to possess some fragment of the divine power they believe flows through your veins. Your lictors struggle to maintain the sacred distance required by law, but the press of bodies threatens to overwhelm even their trained discipline. Some citizens become intoxicated by their proximity to what they perceive as divinity. A young mother breaks through the protective cordon and grasps your hand with both of hers, her eyes wide with religious fervor as she babbles prayers for her sick child. An old veteran throws himself at your feet, begging for forgiveness for sins he committed during distant campaigns. Their desperation is genuine, their faith absolute, but their touch contaminates your sacred person in ways that could be interpreted as evidence of your own corruption. Each contact must be reported, each violation of protocol analyzed for hidden meaning. Did you encourage their approach with a glance? Did your expression suggest improper emotion? Did your response indicate human sympathy rather than divine compassion? The questions multiply like infection, each one a potential weapon in the hands of enemies who watch every festival for signs of your failure to maintain perfect otherworldliness. The festival concludes with a procession through Rome's streets, your litter carried aloft while citizens throw flower petals and shout blessings. From your elevated perch, you can see the entire city spread below you. The 7 hills crowned with temples and palaces, the Tiber flowing like liquid silver in the moonlight, the countless torches that mark the homes where families huddle around their own humble fires, trusting in your purity to keep those flames burning safely. The weight of their faith presses down on you like the lid of a sarcophagus. They believe your virtue protects them from divine wrath. Your prayers shield their children from harm. Your sacrifice ensures their continued prosperity. But you know the truth that they cannot see, that you are not a goddess but a frightened young woman whose own survival depends on maintaining an illusion that grows more fragile with each passing year. You are 17 years old, and 10,000 people worship you as divine while you drown in the terror of being utterly helplessly human. The decision to stop being a victim comes to you slowly, like dawn breaking over the 7 hills, first a gradual lightening of the darkness, then sudden clarity that transforms everything you thought you knew about your world. You are 19 years old when you finally understand that survival is not enough, that 30 years of careful submission will only earn you the right to die quietly in your bed instead of screaming in an underground tomb. It begins with Pomponia Rufina's breakdown during the Ides of Martius. The girl, now 14, and showing the first cracks in her carefully maintained facade of pious devotion, makes the mistake of weeping during the sacred rituals, not quietly, not discreetly, but with the raw, uncontrolled sobs of someone whose spirit has finally shattered under the weight of perpetual terror. Claudia Severa's response is swift and merciless. Pomponia is confined to her chambers, forbidden to participate in any ceremonies until she can restore her spiritual composure. But you recognize this punishment for what it truly is, the first step in a process that will inevitably lead to accusations of mental instability, then moral corruption, then the campus celeratus. The other Vestals react with their usual pattern of strategic distance, carefully avoiding any association with Pomponia's disgrace. Antonia Cecilia suddenly develops urgent business that keeps her away from communal meals. Junior Tertia begins reporting Pomponia's concerning behavior to the chief priestess with the eager efficiency of a hunting hound. Flavia Domitilla speaks in hushed tones about the importance of maintaining sacred discipline and the dangers of emotional weakness. But something inside you rebels against this familiar dance of abandonment and betrayal. Perhaps it's the memory of your own early years, when terror and homesickness threaten to destroy your sanity just as surely as they're destroying Pomponia's. Perhaps it's the growing understanding that none of you are truly safe, that the system that devours her today will turn its hunger on you tomorrow. Or perhaps you've simply grown tired of being afraid. Your first act of resistance is subtle, almost invisible. You begin sitting beside Pomponia during the few meals she's allowed to attend, not speaking, not drawing attention to your choice, but simply being present. Your mere proximity sends a message that someone still considers her worthy of basic human contact. It's a small gesture, but in a world where isolation is often the prelude to destruction, small gestures can mean the difference between hope and despair. Claudia Severa notices, of course. Her eyes miss nothing, and she understands the significance of your defiance even if she can't openly acknowledge it. The goddess values discretion. She tells you during your next private audience, her voice carrying warnings wrapped in religious language. Sometimes our natural sympathies must be tempered by divine wisdom. You nod and smile, and speak the expected words about understanding your duties. But privately, you begin planning your next move. The opportunity comes during the Florea, when the chaos of spring festivals creates brief moments when even Vestal Virgins are not under constant scrutiny. You manage to steal a few minutes alone with Pomponia in the temple's inner garden, away from the ears that usually monitor every conversation. They're going to destroy you, you tell her without preamble, your voice barely above a whisper. Claudia Severa is already laying the groundwork. Small reports about your emotional instability, questions about your commitment to the sacred duties. Within a year, maybe less, you'll face accusations. Pomponia's face goes white as temple marble. "What can I do?" she whispers. "I try to be perfect, but I can't stop the dreams, can't stop remembering my mother's face, can't stop wanting to run home even though I know there's no home left for me." Then we make sure the accusations never come. you reply, your mind already working through possibilities that would have terrified your younger self. Or if they do come, we make sure they don't stick. What follows is your education in the darker arts of Vestal survival techniques that go beyond passive endurance to active manipulation of the system that seeks to destroy you. You begin by studying the patterns of previous accusations, identifying the types of evidence that carry weight and the sources that Romans find most credible. You learn that slave testimony, while legally valuable, can be undermined by questioning the slave's motivations or loyalty. Citizens' reports of suspicious behavior lose credibility when contradicted by multiple witnesses of higher social status. Even letters can be discredited if doubt can be cast on their authenticity or provenance. More importantly, you discover that accusations often originate from predictable sources: political rivals seeking to embarrass influential families, ambitious priests pursuing advancement through zealous enforcement of moral law, or citizens looking to deflect attention from their own failures by discovering corruption in sacred institutions. Your first target is Marcus Flavius Calvus, a young priest whose career has stagnated and who has begun making pointed comments about the questionable dedication he observes among the younger Vestals. Through careful inquiry among temple servants, pork conversations disguised as innocent curiosity about religious matters, you learn that Calvus has been embezzling funds meant for temple maintenance to support his gambling habits. The evidence is damning but requires careful handling. You cannot simply present it openly. Doing so would reveal your involvement in activities far beyond the proper concerns of a Vestal Virgin. Instead, you arrange for the information to reach Claudia Severa through channels that make it appear to come from concerned citizens rather than from one of her subordinates. Calvus's sudden transfer to a remote provincial temple removes one threat while sending a message to other potential accusers that Vestal Virgins are not as helpless as they appear. More importantly, the incident establishes your credibility with the chief priestess, who recognizes useful intelligence regardless of its source. Your protection of Pomponia requires more delicate maneuvering. You begin cultivating relationships with influential matrons who attend temple ceremonies, carefully positioning yourself as a voice of compassion and wisdom beyond your years. When conversations turn to concerns about the younger Vestal's emotional struggles, you speak thoughtfully about the challenges of serving the goddess while so young, framing Pomponia's difficulties as evidence of her sensitive spiritual nature rather than dangerous instability. These women mothers themselves. Many of them mothers respond to your apparent maturity and insight. They begin speaking of you as a rising figure within the order, someone whose wisdom complements her piety. Their social influence creates a protective barrier around both you and, by extension, Pomponia. But perhaps your most crucial discovery is the power of information itself. Knowledge about other people's secrets, carefully gathered and strategically deployed, becomes your most effective weapon. You learn which senators have financial difficulties that might motivate accusations against wealthy Vestal families. You discover which priests have theological disagreements that could be exploited to discredit their testimonies. You identify which citizens have grudges against specific Vestals, and why. This intelligence network requires constant maintenance and expansion. You cultivate sources among temple servants, building relationships based on small favors and apparent concern for their welfare. You listen carefully during public ceremonies, noting which conversations stop when you approach and which continue as if you were invisible. You study the patterns of who speaks to whom, who avoids whom, and whose presence changes the dynamics of any gathering. The work is exhausting and morally ambiguous, requiring you to become someone you never intended to be. But as months pass and Pomponia's situation stabilizes, the whispers about her instability fade, and the threats against her diminish. You begin to understand that this is what real survival looks like in your world. You are 20 years old, and you have learned that sometimes the only way to serve the goddess of the hearth is to become a creature of shadows yourself. The realization that you must plan for your own death comes during your 22nd year, triggered not by illness or immediate threat, but by the simple arithmetic of mortality. You have served as a Vestal Virgin for 14 years, which means 16 remain until your release, if you survive that long. But survival has never been guaranteed, and recent events have made it clear that even perfect service offers no protection against the paranoia and politics that consume women like fuel for an insatiable fire. The catalyst is the execution of Cornelia, the chief Vestal of the generation before Claudius Severa. Emperor Domitian, in his zealous campaign to restore traditional Roman morality, has declared her guilty of incestum and ordered her burial alive despite her 30 years of flawless service. The charges are transparently political. Domitian's way of demonstrating his power over the senatorial class that produced Cornelia's family. But their falseness offers no protection against imperial decree. You watch from the crowd as they lower her into the underground chamber, her dignity intact even as she descends to her death. But what haunts you most is not her courage in the face of injustice, but her final words shouted to the crowd. Caesar thinks me unchaste. Me who performed the sacraments under which he won, he triumphed. Her protest cuts to the heart of the cruel irony that defines your existence. If the empire prospers, it proves the gods favor Rome because of your purity. If disaster strikes, it proves the gods are angry because of your corruption. You cannot win this game. You can only hope to survive it long enough to escape with some fragment of your life intact. Cornelia's death teaches you that even perfection is not enough, that survival requires more than maintaining your purity and performing your duties flawlessly. It requires ensuring that your memory cannot be erased, that your story cannot be rewritten by enemies who would transform you from victim into villain. You must plan not just for life, but for death, and for whatever existence might follow in the treacherous realm of historical memory. You begin by documenting your service in ways that cannot be easily destroyed or falsified. During quiet moments between ceremonies, you write detailed accounts of your daily activities, your careful adherence to sacred law, your observations of temple life and religious practice. But these records must be hidden carefully. Maintaining written accounts could itself be interpreted as evidence of guilty conscience, as if innocent women would have no need to document their purity. You choose your hiding places with the strategic thinking of a general preparing for siege. Copies of your writings are sealed in wax and buried beneath loose stones in the temple's foundation. Others are concealed within the binding of religious texts, their presence invisible unless someone knows exactly where to look. Still others are entrusted to loyal servants whose families have served the temple for generations, people whose own survival depends on maintaining the reputation of the institution they serve. More importantly, you begin cultivating relationships that will outlast your physical existence. The network of influential matrons you've developed over the years becomes a crucial element in your legacy strategy. These women see you as a model of feminine virtue, a living example of the piety and dedication they hope to instill in their own daughters. Their good opinion, carefully maintained through years of strategic interaction, becomes a form of insurance against posthumous character assassination. You also begin commissioning subtle works that will preserve your image in favorable terms. A marble statue for the Atrium Vestae, depicting you in the traditional pose of prayer but with features that emphasize youth and innocence. painted portraits for wealthy patrons who wish to display their connection to the sacred order. Even small bronze figurines that might find their way into private collections, carrying your likeness into homes where future generations might glimpse a face that contradicts whatever lies might be told about your character. The most delicate aspect of your legacy planning involves the younger Vestals who will follow in your footsteps. Pomponia Rufina, now stabilized and showing signs of the strategic thinking you've tried to teach her, represents both opportunity and risk. If she survives and thrives, she could become a witness to your virtue and a guardian of your memory. But if she falls victim to the system's hunger for sacrifice, any association with her could taint your own reputation. You handle this by gradually distancing yourself from Pomponia while ensuring that she has the tools needed for independent survival. Your protection becomes less direct but more valuable. The kind of guidance that appears to come from her own wisdom rather than from your instruction. This approach requires painful emotional detachment, sacrificing the closest thing to friendship you've known in years, but friendship is a luxury that dead women cannot afford. The newer arrivals to the order present different challenges and opportunities. Claudia Marcella, selected just last year at age 7, represents a blank slate that enemies might try to use against you. Children are naturally drawn to kindness, and Marcella's obvious affection for you could be reinterpreted as evidence of improper attachment or favoritism. You must calibrate your interactions with her carefully, enough warmth to ensure her loyalty, not enough to provide ammunition for future accusations. Your financial preparations are equally crucial. As a Vestal Virgin, you have the unusual privilege of owning property and making wills, rights that most Roman women never possess. You use these privileges strategically, purchasing land and commissioning buildings that will require ongoing maintenance from grateful beneficiaries. A small shrine to Vesta in a neighborhood where you're particularly beloved. A fountain that provides clean water to families who remember your generosity. Modest endowments to temple servants whose children will grow up hearing stories of your kindness. These investments in goodwill are calculated to create networks of people with material reasons to remember you favorably. When accusations eventually come minds, and you've learned to think in terms of when rather than if, these voices might provide counterweight to whatever lies your enemies construct. Perhaps most importantly, you begin training yourself to die well. The manner of your death, should it come through execution rather than natural causes, will shape how you're remembered far more than the justice or injustice of your condemnation. Cornelia's courage in her final moments elevated her from victim to martyr in the minds of many Romans, transforming her death from shameful execution into noble sacrifice. You study the accounts of previous Vestals who faced similar fates, analyzing which behaviors enhanced their posthumous reputations and which diminished them. Dignity in the face of injustice creates sympathy. Protests of innocence, while natural, often sound like the desperate lies of the guilty. Displays of faith in the goddess, even while being condemned by her supposed servants, demonstrate virtue that transcends human judgment. You practice these behaviors in private, rehearsing the words you might speak and the demeanor you might display if the worst happens. The exercises feel morbid, even blasphemous, but they represent your final line of defense against a system designed to destroy not just your life but your memory. You are 24 years old, and you have learned that planning your own death is just another form of resistance against those who would erase you from history. The only question is whether your preparations will prove sufficient when the time comes to test them. The end comes not with dramatic accusations or public trials, but with the quiet efficiency of an empire that has perfected the art of disposing of inconvenient women. You are 27 years old, 3 years from the completion of your service, when the first whispers begin to circulate through the corridors of power. Emperor Trajan needs a demonstration of divine favor for his upcoming Dacian campaigns, and nothing purifies the spiritual atmosphere quite like the blood of a fallen Vestal. The selection process is as calculated as everything else in this system of sacred murder. You have survived too long, accumulated too much knowledge, witnessed too many secrets that powerful men would prefer to keep buried. Your very competence has become a liability. You know which priests take bribes, which senators frequent brothels, which officials embezzle temple funds. Dead women tell no tales, and dead Vestals become martyrs whose silence is guaranteed. The evidence against you materializes with suspicious convenience. A slave claims to have witnessed you in compromising conversation with Marcus Antonius Felix, a young senator whose family has recently fallen from imperial favor. The conversation allegedly took place in the temple's inner garden during the Floralia, when the chaos of spring festivals might have provided cover for illicit meetings. The slave's testimony is supported by a letter supposedly found hidden in your chambers. Passionate verses that speak of forbidden love and desperate longing. The handwriting is a skillful forgery, the paper artificially aged, the content carefully crafted to suggest guilt without providing too much specific detail that might be contradicted by witnesses. More accusations follow with orchestrated precision. A citizen reports seeing you accept gifts from the same senator, jewelry that mysteriously appears among your possessions during a surprise search of your quarters. A priest testifies that your behavior during recent ceremonies seemed distracted, as if your mind dwelt on earthly rather than sacred matters. Even your careful cultivation of influential allies is reinterpreted as evidence of ambition and worldliness incompatible with divine service. You recognize the pattern immediately. The same systematic destruction that claimed Valeria Cornelia and countless others before them. But recognition brings no power to resist. The machinery of condemnation operates with inexorable momentum, each piece of false evidence building upon the last until the weight of accusation becomes crushing regardless of its foundation in truth. Claudia Severa, now in her final year of service, and desperate to avoid any contamination from your disgrace, distances herself with the cold efficiency of someone who has survived this long by sacrificing others. The goddess requires purity, she tells the pontifical court, her voice betraying no trace of the woman who once praised your dedication and wisdom. Recent events suggest that not all of us have maintained the standards expected of Vesta's servants. The trial follows the familiar script of predetermined conclusion. You are not permitted to speak in your own defense, your voice is too sacred to be raised in such sordid proceedings. Instead, you stand in perfect silence while men who have never met you dissect your character and condemn your soul based on evidence you know to be false. The Pontifex Maximus, a political appointee whose own moral failings are legend throughout Rome, speaks piously of the need to maintain sacred standards and protect the empire from divine wrath. The College of Priests nods gravely as each piece of fabricated evidence is presented, their faces masks of righteous concern that barely conceal their relief at not being the target themselves. Marcus Antonius Felix, the supposed object of your forbidden passion, has conveniently vanished into voluntary exile. His absence is presented as evidence of his guilt. Surely an innocent man would remain to defend both his honor and yours. But you understand the truth. His family has paid for his escape while leaving you to bear the full weight of their political disgrace. The verdict arrives with the inevitability of sunrise. Guilty of incestum, the violation of your sacred vows. The sentence follows immediately. Death by immurement, to be carried out within the hour. No time for appeals, no opportunity for intervention, no possibility that inconvenient facts might emerge to complicate the narrative of your corruption. Your preparation for death becomes a final performance, watched by crowds who see in your composure either evidence of divine acceptance or confirmation of your guilt. They unbraid your hair for the last time, the elaborate scenic crimes that marked your sacred status falling in dark waves around your shoulders. Your white robes are replaced with the simple tunic of a condemned woman, as if your divine nature could be stripped away along with your ceremonial garments. The procession to the Campus Celeratus moves through Rome's streets like a funeral cortege for someone still breathing. You ride in a covered litter, your hands bound but your dignity intact, understanding that these final moments will determine how history remembers you. The crowds that line the route watch with the fascination of spectators at gladiatorial games, witnessing the ultimate consequence of corruption in their most sacred institution. At the burial ground, a chamber has been prepared according to ancient custom, barely large enough for a person to lie down, equipped with a bed, a lamp, and provisions that mock survival. The bread will last 3 days if carefully rationed. The water might stretch to 4. The lamp has oil enough for perhaps 6 hours of light before darkness claims everything. The Pontifex Maximus speaks the ritual words that transform murder into sacrifice, execution into divine judgment. His voice carries across the assembled crowd as he explains that this death is not punishment but purification, not ending, but offering. Rome will be cleansed by your blood, protected by your sacrifice, blessed by the removal of corruption from its most sacred order. You descend the narrow steps into your tomb with the measured grace that has marked every public appearance of your adult life. The chamber is smaller than you expected, so low that you cannot stand upright, so narrow that your outstretched arms nearly touch both walls. The provisions arranged on the single shelf seem pathetic against the reality of slow starvation, but you understand their symbolic purpose. Rome can claim it offered you chance at survival, that your death resulted from divine judgment rather than human cruelty. Above you, priests seal the entrance with stone and earth, their voices growing muffled as layers of soil accumulate. The last sounds from the surface are the shuffling feet of departing crowds and the distant ring of metal on stone as workers complete your entombment. Then silence falls like a shroud, broken only by the whisper of your own breathing and the guttering flame of your lamp. You are 27 years old, and you are dying for the crime of knowing too much about men who prefer their secrets buried with the women who keep them. In the darkness that swallows your light, you understand that this has always been your true purpose, not to serve the goddess, but to serve as sacrifice to the fears and failures of mortal men who wrap their cruelty in the language of divine necessity. Rome sleeps peacefully above your tomb, confident that another threat to its spiritual purity has been eliminated, another scapegoat offered to appease whatever gods might be watching from their distant thrones. Above your sealed tomb, the machinery of historical revision begins its work before your lamp has even guttered out in the darkness below. Rome cannot simply execute a Vestal Virgin and move on mine. Your death must be transformed into legend, your story reshaped to serve the needs of those who condemned you. The truth of your innocence becomes inconvenient, so it must be buried as thoroughly as your body. The official chroniclers work with practiced efficiency, crafting accounts that emphasize your guilt while minimizing the political motivations behind your execution. Scribes employed by the imperial court produce detailed records of your trial, carefully edited to present the false evidence as overwhelming and incontrovertible. Your 27 years of faithful service are reduced to footnotes, while the manufactured scandal of your final months expands to fill scrolls that will be copied and distributed throughout the empire. Marcus Antonius Felix, safely established in his Greek exile, contributes his own version of events through letters that paint you as the seducer rather than the seduced. His testimony arrives with convenient timing, just as public curiosity about the case reaches its peak. He describes passionate encounters that never occurred, quotes conversations that were never spoken, provides intimate details that transform you from victim into temptress in the public imagination. But your careful preparations begin to bear fruit even as these lies proliferate. The network of allies you cultivated over years of strategic kindness proves more durable than your enemies anticipated. Influential matrons who attended your ceremonies speak privately of their disbelief, their quiet conversations creating undercurrents of doubt that no amount of official propaganda can entirely suppress. Livia Marcella, whose sick child you once blessed during a temple ceremony, commissions a small shrine in her family's garden where your memory is honored alongside household gods. She tells her daughters stories of your gentleness and wisdom, creating a counter-narrative that will survive in their family's oral tradition long after the official accounts have crumbled to dust. The servants you treated with unusual kindness become unexpected guardians of your reputation. Kitchen slaves whisper to their children about the Vestal who remembered their names and asked after their families. Temple attendants speak in hushed tones of your generosity, your willingness to share your personal allowance when their own wages were delayed by bureaucratic inefficiency. These humble voices lack the power to challenge imperial narratives directly, but they create what future historians will recognize as parallel tradition, stories told in markets and taverns passed down through generations of common people who experienced your humanity firsthand. Their testimonies lack the grandeur of official chronicles, but they carry the stubborn persistence of truth that refuses to die quietly. The written records you hid so carefully begin to surface decades later, discovered by temple renovations and construction projects that disturb foundations you chose with such care. A maintenance worker finds scrolls sealed in wax beneath loose stones, their contents providing glimpses of daily life that contradict the official portrait of corruption and scandal. These documents will puzzle scholars for centuries, offering evidence of a mind focused on duty rather than passion, of concern centered on temple politics rather than romantic intrigue. Your physical monuments prove more fragile than your hidden testimonies. The marble statue you commissioned for the atrium Vesti develops suspicious cracks that require its removal within a year of your death. The painted portraits in wealthy homes suffer mysterious accidents, wine spills that stain faces beyond recognition, fires that consume only specific sections of walls, theft that targets your image while leaving more valuable artwork untouched. But some traces prove more persistent than authorities expect. Bronze figurines bearing your likeness surface in private collections, their owners claiming ignorance of their subjects' identity. Small shrines in neighborhood temples maintain spaces for unnamed Vestals, their dedicatory inscriptions worn smooth by time but their purpose clear to those who know how to read between the lines. Most significantly, your death becomes a cautionary tale that protects future generations of Vestals in ways you never intended. The obvious injustice of your condemnation makes subsequent emperors more cautious about casual executions, understanding that even fabricated scandals can backfire if they appear too convenient or politically motivated. The memory wars surrounding your legacy will continue for centuries, with each generation reinterpreting your story according to their own needs and prejudices. But the very persistence of these conflicts ensures that your name survives, that your existence cannot be entirely erased despite the best efforts of those who killed you. In the end, you achieve a form of immortality more durable than the empire that destroyed you. not as the corrupt priestess of official history, but as a reminder that power's victims sometimes refuse to stay buried, that truth has a way of seeping through even the most carefully constructed lies. 2,000 years after your lamp burned out in that underground chamber, archaeologists brushed dust from marble fragments that once bore your name. They pieced together shards of pottery that held the oil for lamps you tended, reconstruct floor plans of rooms where you learned to live without living, catalogue artifacts from a world that consumed young women as systematically as it built aqueducts and conquered provinces. The scholars who study your remains speak in careful academic language about religious obligations and cultural practices, but their sanitized terminology cannot disguise what they're really examining. The bones of a 1,000-year Holocaust that targeted girls for the crime of existing in a society terrified of female power. They debate the finer points of Roman law and religious custom while dancing around the central truth that would make their research unbearable, that every Vestal Virgin was a child stolen. Every sacred flame was fed with stolen lives. Your story echoes through the centuries in ways both subtle and profound. The Christian nuns who replaced you inherited not just your celibacy but your fundamental vulnerability. Women set apart from society, elevated to spiritual prominence, and thereby exposed to accusations of corruption whenever convenient. The witch trials that swept through medieval Europe followed patterns you would recognize: impossible standards of purity, evidence manufactured to meet predetermined conclusions, women destroyed for threatening male authority simply by existing outside traditional roles. In drawing rooms of 18th century Europe, educated women read Plutarch's accounts of your sisterhood and see reflections of their own constrained existence. They recognize the beautiful cage of idealization that transforms women into symbols rather than people, the way reverence becomes another form of control when it demands the sacrifice of everything human. Their letters and diaries record a growing understanding that protection and imprisonment are often indistinguishable when viewed from inside the cell. The suffragettes of the 19th and early 20th centuries invoke your memory in ways you never could have anticipated, seeing in your legal rights to own property, to testify in court, to make wills, a glimpse of the equality they fight to achieve. But they also understand what those rights cost you, recognizing that autonomy granted in exchange for humanity is no freedom at all. They see in your white robes both aspiration and warning, understanding that society's angels are often society's most vulnerable victims. Modern scholars studying domestic violence recognize patterns in your story that transcend historical periods. The isolation that makes victims vulnerable, the way protection becomes control, the systematic destruction of support networks that might offer escape. They see in your carefully managed public appearances the performative nature of abuse, the way victims are forced to smile while dying inside, to project contentment while planning survival. Psychologists studying trauma identify in Vestal Virgin accounts the symptoms they recognize in their own patients: hypervigilance disguised as religious devotion, emotional numbing presented as spiritual transcendence, the desperate perfectionism of people who believe that being flawless might finally make them safe. They understand that your sacred composure was not divine grace but dissociation, that your otherworldly serenity masked the same psychological survival mechanisms they see in survivors of modern captivity. The #Me Too movement finds in your silence not complicity, but recognition of a terrible truth that still resonates: that women who speak out against powerful men risk destruction, that victims are often blamed for their own victimization, that systems of justice serve those who control them rather than those who suffer under them. Your gagged mouth during that final procession becomes a symbol they recognize all too well. Perhaps most significantly, Your story illuminates the persistent human tendency to sacrifice the vulnerable to maintain social order. Every generation finds its scapegoats, its designated victims who must be pure enough to die for everyone else's sins. The faces change, the justifications evolve, but the fundamental pattern remains. When societies feel threatened, they devour their most idealized members to appease whatever gods they fear. Your legacy teaches us that progress is neither linear nor permanent, that the same fears and hatreds that killed you can resurrect themselves in new forms whenever circumstances allow. The Campus Celeratus may be ruins now, but the impulse that filled it with victims lives on in every society that would rather destroy women than examine its own failures. In the end, your greatest victory may be simply this: that your story survives to warn us, that your voice reaches across 2 millennia to whisper what you could never say aloud, that the price of being sacred is always the sacrifice of being human, and that price is always too high. As the night deepens around you and the ancient world fades into the gentle embrace of sleep, take with you not the horror of what was endured, but the quiet strength of what was survived. In the darkness of that underground chamber, something more powerful than Rome's cruelty took root, the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be erased, no matter how determined its destroyers. The Vestal Virgins were not just victims of a brutal system, though they were certainly that. They were also survivors, strategists and silent revolutionaries who found ways to preserve pieces of themselves despite everything designed to crush them. In their careful alliances and hidden writings, in their small acts of kindness and their stubborn refusal to break completely, they demonstrated that even in the most impossible circumstances, humanity finds ways to endure. Their stories matter not because they shock us with their cruelty, but because they remind us of our capacity for both inflicting and surviving unimaginable suffering. They teach us to recognize the signs when societies begin to sacrifice their most vulnerable members, to understand that what we call honor is often disguised horror, and that true sacred service never requires the destruction of those who provide it. In remembering them, we honor not their suffering but their persistence, not their victimization, but their resistance, not their deaths but the stubborn vitality that kept their spirits alive, even when their bodies were buried in darkness. They whisper to us across the centuries that survival is its own form of victory, that being remembered truthfully is more powerful than being venerated falsely. Rest now in the knowledge that their voices have finally been heard, that their stories have been told without the lies that buried them for so long. Sleep peacefully, knowing that in hearing their truth, you've helped ensure they will never again die in silence. The eternal flame burns on, but tonight it burns for them, not as sacred prisoners, but as free spirits who have finally found their way home. Let their peace become yours as you drift into dreams where white robes are worn by choice, where temples are refuges rather than prisons, and where young girls grow up to write their own stories. Sleep well. Still awake? If you found yourself drawn into tonight's mysteries, we've got more secrets waiting in the shadows. Just click to uncover what lies ahead. And hey, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so these late night revelations find their way to you whenever we unveil the next chapter.